I'm going to be talking about something rather more singular, but nevertheless very important with regard to shipboard safety. Now, it's commonly stated that more deaths occur in relation to enclosed space entry than any other shipboard activity. The dangers associated with enclosed spaces are well known. It was hammered into me when I was a cadet 40 years ago. But yet we still have this unremitting level of people losing their lives on board ships due to entry and associated with entry into enclosed spaces. That's both crew and also shore personnel. Part of the problem may lie in human element issues, which we're all familiar with, fatigue, complacency, cutting corners. It could be related to, poor and inadequate training or risk awareness. But I also think one of the problems is that there is a common misconception as to what actually an enclosed space is. Okay, so this is basically how IMO characterizes enclosed spaces. And you have the 3 points there: limited openings for entry and exit, inadequate ventilation, and is not designed for continuous worker occupancy. Now, that's a very broad definition, and IMO do give quite a few examples of enclosed spaces on board ships there. But the important issue here is that this is not exhaustive. Enclosed spaces on ships have to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, assessing each individual potential enclosed space and why it's dangerous or why it could potentially become dangerous. And it is a requirement that these are listed on board a ship, and obviously it follows that they should be clearly and conspicuously identified wherever they are. The hazard associated with enclosed spaces, principally it's to do with the composition of the atmosphere and where it varies from the normal atmosphere that we breathe. There are three main issues here: oxygen deficiency, or that the space may contain flammable gases or toxic gases or vapors. Or it could be in any combination of these factors. So this is really a feature of, more what the space is containing. It may contain something which consumes the oxygen in the atmosphere, or it may emit toxic vapors or flammable gases. So this could be related to what's in it, of course. It could be related to how the space is used, or the condition of the space. And we'll see a few examples of that. Now, I think most people would recognize that a ballast tank is an enclosed space. And what's the hazard here? Well, if the coatings are ineffective and you have air in direct contact with bare steel, then the steel will react with the oxygen in the air, and the oxygen will become depleted. So it will create an atmosphere which does not support life. Not so much of a problem these days, because coating systems on ships are an awful lot better, but there is no room for complacency here. What's probably not so obvious, but can be extremely dangerous on board a ship is void spaces. Void spaces are seldom accessed, and they may have very restricted ventilation or even no ventilation at all. And chain lockers, which may not be obviously dangerous, but it proved very dangerous and tragically so to 3 crew members on board a support vessel called the Viking Islay. This was a few years ago. And what happened was the vessel was on standby in the North Sea, and like most of this type of vessel, the crew accommodation was very close to the chain locker. What happened was that due to the motion of the vessel, the anchor chains within the chain locker were moving around. They were creating a lot of noise. So the crew decided to go inside the chain locker and secure the chains to stop them moving around. So 2 crew members went into the space where the access was. They opened up the tank lid. The first crew member goes down and he immediately gets into difficulty and he collapses. His fellow crew member sees what's going on. He calls the bridge and he immediately goes and follows suit, goes into the space, and he, of course, collapses, it's left for the rest of the crew to deal with the situation. The other crew member actually came. He made a rather botched effort to rescue the other two crew members. He went in with an emergency escape breathing device, and he also got into difficulty and collapsed. So we have three crew members who unfortunately eventually lost their lives. Now the issue here is, of course, the corrosion inside the chain locker, the corrosion of the chain locker boundaries and also the cable itself. These anchors were seldom used, but the crew members, not only did they not take any precautions, but importantly, they didn't recognize that the chain locker was an enclosed space, requiring special measures for entry. Cargo holds. I think probably the most dangerous space on board a ship. We lose a lot of people every year, stevedores and crew members, through entry into cargo holds. Now cargo holds in themselves are not dangerous spaces. The danger is created, of course, by the cargo that we put in the space. Some cargoes will deplete oxygen. They may be organic cargoes like timber or grain. And you have other oxidizing cargoes such as minerals, scrap, DRI. But also there's a number of cargoes which can emit toxic or flammable gases. And a classic example of that is coal. Coal ticks all of the boxes. It's probably one of the most dangerous cargoes you can carry on a bulk carrier. And if you look at the image here, there is another element. It's not unusual to see that the access ladder is in an enclosed, protected space, a trunk. And so what you have in effect is an enclosed space within an enclosed space. So the air out in the hold may be safe to breathe, but inside that confined space it may not be. And we do see from time to time crew or stevedores losing their lives by, going down into the access trunk and finding, that there is insufficient oxygen or there is toxic gas in there. CO2 rooms, emergency fire pump wells, these are spaces which we would normally associate with safety. But they can be rendered dangerous in certain circumstances. Now, it's easy to imagine that if you have a leak in your CO2 room from the CO2 system, then that CO2 is going to displace breathable air. And there have been casualties due to this cause. Crew or technicians going inside the CO2 room and then, getting into difficulty. The fire pump well, those of you who are familiar with ships, you'll see this is a very common arrangement. You've got a well, perhaps 3-4 meters deep inside the steering gear compartment. And I'm aware of a case whereby a chief engineer and a surveyor went down to check the emergency fire pump, and quite quickly they started to feel the effects of oxygen deprivation. And what had happened was they were working on the provision room refrigeration machinery, which was located in the steering flat, and there'd been a leak of freon gas. And the freon gas, being heavier than air, migrated down into the well. So that was a very dangerous situation. Engine rooms, full of enclosed spaces. You've got numerous tanks. You've got the boilers. You've got pressure vessels. And even the scavenge space on a main engine. There was quite a tragic incident a few years ago whereby a second engineer became trapped inside a scavenge space. He was carrying out an inspection before the ship's departure. And whilst he was in this space, he was unaccompanied, unattended. The scavenge space door closed. Perhaps the ship took a list or whatever. And the securing cleat engaged from the outside, so it was impossible for him to open it. Nobody could find him. They conducted a search on board the vessel. They assumed he'd gone ashore, gone AWOL, and of course they started the main engine, and he died a horrible death. I was talking before about identifying enclosed spaces. Now, you may look at this. This is an access hatch to a cargo hold. And you may think, well, you know, again, this ticks all the boxes. It's warning that it is an enclosed space, that you require an entry permit, the space should be ventilated. You know, it appears to be perfect. But this particular vessel and that particular hatch was entered by 3 crew members. The cargo was carrying a timber, and one after the other, they went into the hold, they got into the difficulty and collapsed. All 3 crew members lost their lives. And this was just a small vessel, so that was almost half the crew. So it's not just one person getting into difficulty, you know, you have this domino effect. But it's not just the atmosphere of an enclosed space that can render it dangerous. It may be dangerous for other reasons. If you consider a tank like this, it's about 12 meters high. You're not just working in an enclosed space, you're working aloft, which again requires additional safety measures. In a ballast tank, it may be covered in mud. It may be difficult to move around. And in this particular case, the chief officer was carrying out a routine inspection. He got onto the first horizontal stringer and he slipped on the mud, or that's what they assume happened. And he fell 8 meters down to the bottom of the tank to his death. This is a rather stark statistic. Nearly 60% of enclosed space casualties are persons attempting an ill-prepared rescue. Well, we've seen plenty of examples of that. What happens is somebody gets into difficulty and the person attending, instead of raising the alarm and conducting a rescue in accordance with planned procedures, they just instinctively go in to help their shipmate. So you're doubling the problem. And somebody else comes along and they do exactly the same thing. And just to summarize, a few points here. Complacency, enclosed spaces are dangerous until proven otherwise. I mean, that really is the mantra here. Enclosed spaces to be positively identified, and that really includes making sure that everybody is aware is aware as to where the enclosed spaces are and the hazard which they present. And that we're talking about all the crew here, not just the officers. Follow procedures. It's not normally the procedures that are at fault, it's the failure to properly observe them. And rigorous training and drills. That the drills are as realistic as possible, but safe, and they should be conducted in all different parts of the vessel so that they can identify the challenges in being able to rescue casualties from those individual spaces. And finally, enforce a zero-tolerance culture to unprepared entry into enclosed spaces. Thank you.